This video is brought to you in part by Aura. More on them in a bit. What is the most beaten game of all time, and how do I know that it's GTA 5? I did the math, well, kind of, and while I was right to assume that GTA or Minecraft would be the obvious winners here, I found many more interesting wrinkles on top of that. For example, the most successful game of all time, Minecraft, may have sold over 300 million copies, but only about as many of those buyers have defeated the Ender Dragon as have beaten Insomniac's Spider-Man 1, a game with not even 10% of the player base. Using trophy and achievement data across PlayStation, Xbox, and Steam, and comparing that to platform-specific sales data whenever possible, I calculated how many people have finished many different games from across the last 15 to 20 years. What's most fascinating is an evolving trend from across that time span. A greater portion of players today are finishing games than maybe ever before, and yet most people still don't get close to the credits. So why don't people finish games, and can we see through some of this data the tactics that developers have attempted in order to get more people to actually play all the way through? Now, before I dig into all of that, I know there are already going to be some questions to address, such as, what about older games? Or what about achievements that transfer between console generations? Or you do know that some people hack achievements, right? And of course, how can you say that more people are beating games today when we don't have older data? I'll hit on each of these throughout the video. Obviously, this is only as scientific a breakdown as is possible for one of the most secretive industries out there, which is to say it's not at all scientific. I'm just doing what I can to answer a question few others seem stupid enough to have tried answering. There's also the issue of borrowing games, secondhand game sales, subscription services. I do have one example that'll touch on this where a game has double the players as reported sales, but it creeps into territory that's just impossible to account for. All I'm doing is getting us into the ballpark, and frankly, even with the ballpark, it's still not even a debate. GTA 5 answers the first question, what about older games, because more people have beaten GTA 5's story than almost any other game has had in lifetime sales. My girl math came out to 27.42 million distinct accounts that have popped a trophy or achievement for finishing the final mission in GTA 5's story. Do note there's only one achievement for this regardless of which final mission you end up choosing. Mind you, this is a massive lowball for reasons I'm going to get into once I show my work, and even a lowball is still almost exactly the amount of copies San Andreas, the #1 PS2 game of all time, ever sold. Only about 30 games exist that have sold comparably to this most conservative beaten percentage of GTA 5. Most of those are multiplayer titles or otherwise unbeatable arcade experiences like Tetris, Pac-Man, Animal Crossing, Wii Fit, Mario Kart, etc. Well, technically one person's beaten Tetris now. You could argue that beating all of the cups in Mario Kart 8 means you've beaten the game, to which I will say, only if you did it on 200cc, you coward. Of the few remaining bestsellers that don't themselves have achievement data to pull from, only Super Mario Bros. 1 and Pokemon Generation 1 have enough sales to be in the debate, and you would need 50 to 60% of buyers to have finished those games to start that convo. For reference, a former industry executive named John Lee said back in 2011 that just 10 years ago, I recall some standard that only 20% of gamers ever finish a game. That's also the percentage of viewers that subscribe on YouTube. Please hit the damn button, this is all I have. Even with GTA 5, this is just a pure raw numbers game, because depending on the platform, 20+% of GTA 5 players never even did the first mission, due to the online being the main meat of that game now. This 10 to 20% falloff is exceptionally common. It's a fun phenomenon that's relatively consistent across games, and only some of this can be chalked up to people accidentally logging into their sibling or partner's account on their Xbox. My favorite example of this is that Assassin's Creed 2 had about 11% of accounts on any given platform that consistently never got the first achievement for being born. You press 4 buttons, you cannot miss this, and 1 in 10 accounts that ever loaded the game up never went past the title screen. An actual study performed in 2019 using Steam data and far smarter math than I will estimated that only about 1 in 7 players that load a game up will finish a single-player campaign on PC. They did it for science though and not internet points, so just trust my numbers more. With Mario 1 and Pokemon 1, it's certainly possible that either of those two games put up historically high finish rates just to make this maybe the start of a conversation, but I don't think it's likely. That brings us to the second question: what about cross-generation ports that share achievement progress? That could just mean that if you beat GTA 5 on 360, boom, you've counted twice the moment you buy the Xbox One game. Well, no, GTA 5 didn't support cross-save transfer from the PS3 and Xbox 360 to the next platform, so every second-generation owner of that game that finished it played the entire campaign either again or for the first time. Now, the PS4 to 5 and Xbox One to Series versions do have save transfer and achievement carryover. I'll talk more about that in a moment. First, I've got to break down my math here, and before that, I've got to break down the sponsor of today's video, Aura. So I'm gonna hit you with a real story here. A while back, somebody tried to dox me because they were upset at my Sonic Team documentary or something. I'm not sure, but they tagged convicted felon and former Sonic figurehead Yuji Naka, so I think they were upset about Sonic. The thing is, all they got was my elementary school address because I take care of my personal data as somebody with a presence online. And Aura has genuinely been a massive help with making it even easier to keep that sort of sensitive info safe. For example, back when we started my podcast, Crub, I had to help some of the others find the opt-out request pages for the countless scummy data brokers out there, the ones that keep making money off of your private info and then hide the opt-out behind a page that doesn't load. Aura handles all of that nonsense for you automatically so that you're not spending hours and hours searching, writing mean emails, following up when the data broker ignores your mean emails. Aura takes that pain and makes it painless. Ever since I added Aura to my privacy and security A-team of sorts, because they've been so stringent, I've gotten so many fewer annoying robocalls every single day, enough that I could drop my call blocker app entirely. It saved me money. They watch for signs of identity theft, they can monitor your accounts for unauthorized purchases. Aura's just a one-stop safety shop with a password manager, antivirus, VPN, and more in case you don't want to juggle so many different apps for each and every need. So let Aura do the hard work of keeping you safe online. Sign up at aura.com/bolt and start your 14-day free trial today. Thanks again to Aura for sponsoring this video, and now, let's get back to it. Okay, now back to breaking down my math. Do note that more precise numbers are going to show on screen. What I say out loud here is going to be rounded so that I don't lose everybody all at once, because there's a lot of numbers, and I'm gonna lose myself too. Don't make an Eminem joke. GTA 5 on Xbox 360 sold just under 23 million copies, and 31% of players there finished the final mission, 7.2 million total players. On PlayStation 3, it sold 29.5 million units, with just under a 29% trophy rate for 8.5 million more. Add it up and you've got 15.7 million accounts that have beaten GTA 5's story on just the original gen of GTA 5. Once we leap into the second generation of GTA 5, something starts to change, because this is where GTA Online, streaming/content creation, and the GTA roleplay era envelops the game. See, according to publisher Take-Two, from 2013 to 2018, GTA 5 sold 90 million copies, and from 2018 to 2023, it sold 100 million more. It's actually growing in sales year over year. This Market Watch graph, breaking down the game's sales directly using Take-Two's data, is from 2018, well after the first generation versions of GTA would have reached their sales ceiling, and this is how I got to these sales estimates for those two legacy platforms. Now, as time goes on and more players are coming to GTA for the online rather than offline, fewer new players are consuming the story content whatsoever. Where 83% of PS3 players completed the first story mission, only 73% of PS4 players did. Xbox has a generally more multiplayer-centric audience, so where 77% of 360 players did that first mission, that dropped to 55% on Xbox One. So I took a leap at this point and did what every good scientific experiment should do. I assumed. Where's my lab coat? My pitch here is that the number of new buyers from 2018 to today that have finished GTA 5 story is minuscule. That's 100 million sales, and there are people in that 100 million that are certainly doing it, but the vast majority of players are feeding on shark cards now. This is what makes that 27-ish million finished estimate a lowball. At this point, if I don't assume what we all just know to be the case, it would just be running up the score in GTA's favor. So I took the sales data from 2018 and prior and calculated that of the, at the time, 11 million Xbox One owners, with its current 12% achievement rate, 1.3 million people have finished it there. And another 24.5 million sales on PS4 at a 17% completion rate adds 4 more million in the beaten column there. Add those to the 15.7 million first-gen game beaters, and you've got 21.2 million. And keep in mind, those trophy and achievement percentages, they've gone down since I first started scoping out some of this data a few months ago, because more GTA Online players keep coming in on those systems, and there's no historical archive that tracks achievement percentages over the years, so those 12 and 17% completion rates are certainly at least a bit lower than they would have been in 2018, if not a good amount lower. I then took one final leap and assumed that because PS4 and Xbox One saves do transfer to the current gen, practically nobody new is beating the story as they upgrade. In other words, those are just cross achievements from old saves. On Xbox Series and PS5 respectively, only 4 and 5% of players have the final story achievement, which also indicates that the people upgrading nowadays are that crowd of GTA Online players, again, as we all frankly expect. Before I forget, on PC this game sold 26 million copies and has a 24% finish rate there, 6.2 million people. Add that all up and we get to my very conservative estimate of 27.42 million criminals, also known as One Australia. And then there's the X factor of GTA 5 having been given away both on PS Plus and Xbox Game Pass at different points, adding a ton of free copies that I'm gonna assume Take-Two isn't counting when it reports sales. That would drive up the raw number of accounts in the achievement and trophy databases, and since these freebies have been recent, it would drive down the beaten percentages even further. There are pretty decent odds that GTA 5 has been beaten by more people than have ever purchased Zelda Breath of the Wild, currently the 20th or so best-selling game ever. To close out on GTA, as far as the question of achievement hacking goes, realistically there's no good answer to this other than that it's not going to end up being a significant percentage of players, and that percentage would be wildly outpaced by me being so conservative with the last 100 million sales of the game. Achievement hacking certainly exists. I remember the tales of the vaunted Call of Duty Xbox achievement hack lobbies back in the day, and I'm sure those existed somehow in GTA's case as well. But only 0.4% of owners on PS3 and 0.1% of PS4 and 5 owners ended up with the game's Platinum Trophy for completing all of the original single player and the original online trophies, not counting any update ones that came after. Even if that's a lot of people in raw terms, when we're talking about 50+ million people that have played on those platforms, that's kind of a drop in the bucket. Plus, let's be real, people care far less today about the cool EP number than we did when the luster of achievements and trophy hunting was still fresh. And when more players than ever before have 2 or all 3 of the major console ecosystems nowadays, we're all too occupied playing more good games than worrying about our achievement score. Even on Steam, where you can just run a program that pops achievements for you, the lowest percentage achievement is 3.6. On a game that sells better than toilet paper, yes, that's a lot of people that have done everything, but I don't think it's unfair to say the percentage of players that have lied about beating or have cheated to beat a game would be about the same today as it would have been with any games older than achievement data. So, you know, like that one friend in first grade that totally found Peekaboo in Pokemon Red, and otherwise most people were probably pretty honest. Now, we're not even done with Rockstar Games yet, because Take-Two announced back in November that Red Dead Redemption 2 had sold a whopping 57 million copies, on the cusp of overtaking the original Super Mario Bros. In lifetime sales. I couldn't find reliable platform sales breakdowns here, so I'm gonna give you an even broader estimate since it's not gonna be close to passing GTA. On PlayStation, just under 30% of players have completed the final pre-epilogue mission, 21% on Xbox and 23% on Steam. Even if we use only the PlayStation number and assume that 30% across the board had finished RDR2's story, it'd only be 17 million people, as many as have beaten Minecraft using my most generous girl math, or significantly more once I get into the nitty-gritty. So Minecraft was by far the hardest one to compile, and there's a caveat here because there's a free-to-play Chinese version of Minecraft that completely breaks everything and doesn't have Xbox achievements. As of October 2023, Minecraft's reported sales are over 300 million across almost as many different systems and platforms. The versions that have distinct Xbox achievement sets include Android, Apple TV, Gear VR, iOS, Kindle Fire, Switch, Windows, Windows Phone, Xbox 360, Xbox One, I think a second version on Xbox One using the Bedrock version of Minecraft, and the broad version on Game Pass that effectively consolidated many of these with the Better Together update. Plus, there are also trophy-enabled versions on PS3, 4, and Vita. The 3DS and Wii U editions of Minecraft, the original Java edition on PC, and any others that I've missed had in-game achievements, but these were not hooked into the Xbox achievement backend, which makes this even more complicated. And if you're thinking it's insane enough for a game to have over a dozen achievement sets that didn't have cross-progression, it gets better, because they all have different completion percentages. The generally agreed "you've beaten Minecraft" point is defeating the Ender Dragon, and I'm gonna avoid reading off all of these numbers just so that you don't go numb. I can't feel my legs here, but the percent of people that did this varies from just over 2% on Xbox One and Xbox 360 to a little over 3.5% on Windows and Switch, all the way up to 9% of Vita players. So what I ended up deciding on was, like with Red Dead, the most generous assumption possible. The current version of Minecraft, the Game Pass one where the achievements seem to just carry over now as long as you're playing from the same Xbox account, this one has just under 5% of players that have killed the Ender Dragon. The average of the 8 non-mobile versions of this game for which I could find achievement data came out to about 4.6%, so 5% is within a reasonable range. Assuming that every sold copy of Minecraft is a unique individual and that 5% to, I don't know, let's be even more generous, 6% of those people have killed the Ender Dragon, that means that 15 to 18 million people have beaten Minecraft. Except, here's the catch, the deprecated mobile versions were the majority of the sales for Minecraft's lifespan. In 2021, when Minecraft had reached 238 million sales, 56% of those were the Pocket Edition. And although it was very hard to find different Xbox accounts with public achievement history that have played each of the 400 mobile versions of Minecraft, since for some reason Xbox doesn't share achievement completion percentage data with even the officially endorsed sites like True Achievements, after way too much searching, I found it because I love you and I hate myself. On iOS, only 1.75% of players killed the Ender Dragon, and just under 1.2% on Android. 0.5% for Kindle Fire if you want a fun bonus. Let's assume that all 60 million sales post-2021 track at that intentionally high 6% completion estimate, along with that 105 million non-Pocket Edition buyers from prior to 2021. That'd be a smidge under 10 million Dragon Slayers on non-mobile versions, plus another 2.3 million if we say that every mobile sale was on the iOS's completion rate. I've searched long and hard to try and find platform-specific breakdowns to try and give Minecraft the same due diligence that I gave to GTA, but Xbox is always cagey with details nowadays. So as precisely as I can estimate using the numbers I've got, that's 12.2 million out of 300 million buyers that would be able to say they killed the Ender Dragon and finished Minecraft, fewer people than beat Insomniac's first Spider-Man game. Unless we add in the Chinese version of Minecraft co-developed by NetEase. This version is completely free provided that you are located in China and sign up using your Chinese ID. If you're not under 18, the game locks you out of playing from 10 PM to 8 AM, and naturally there are no Xbox achievements in this version because social credit score joke. Ah shit, I was supposed to write one. As of 2023, it appears that 700 million people have played this version. Now, if you assume the completion rate there is in that same 1.75 to 5% range, then globally we'd be looking at about 25 to 50 million people that have beaten Minecraft out of a billion players. If we assume this version is being played more like the mobile version of Minecraft since it's available on mobile, GTA would still be on top.
When there's some shit to be won, goddammit, I want it.
And if you wanted to be as generous with GTA's estimate as you could be by saying that 5% of Chinese players beat Minecraft, it would still have an argument even putting aside how much of a cheat code China is in this discussion. I mean, if there were a free Chinese version of GTA 5 after all, well, actually, I'd really like to see what changes would have to be made to get that approved. That 1 billion player count does give me a reason to touch on smartphone games, since billions of free downloads will always outpace any traditional game sales. However, Minecraft is still number one as far as beatable mobile games go, in a sea of Candy Crushes and PUBG Mobiles and countless other games that keep filling my inbox with sponsor offers. Now, to go back to the start of the video, this brings me back to the final question we had asked. How can I say that more people are beating games today when we don't have older data pre-achievements? Well, putting aside the raw numbers aspect, since we are currently in an era where all three consoles are the fastest selling of their respective families, and how people are more often than ever before playing on 2 or more different console families, not even mentioning PC, putting all of that to the side, we do have some of that older data of game completion. We already hit on that common belief shared among different developers and publishers in the pre-achievement era that only 20% of players were likely to finish any given game, and this tracked well into the achievement era itself. 2010's most awarded game, Red Dead Redemption 1, was famously highlighted for having only a 10% finish rate the year after it released. That percentage has since gone up with time, of course, in part thanks to its even more successful sequel getting new and old players alike to go back, but for a long time, RDR1 only had half to a third of what 2's completion percentage would be, despite Red Dead 2 being double or triple the length. Even over a decade after that first observation took gaming press by storm, Red Dead 1 is still only firmly in that 20% range on both PS3 and Xbox. Especially as you get further from the 360's launch, or further from when Sony added trophy support, more games started to bump that 20% beaten trend closer to 30% or higher. You can go back and take your pick of your favorite PS3 or 360 game to check yourself, although do keep in mind that a lot of these have skewed up over time as some folks cleared their backlogs. Call of Duty 4 has a super high 37% story finish on 360, 12% higher than Call of Duty 2, and Modern Warfare is one of the most hyped and acclaimed stories that any game had ever had at the time. Meanwhile, that's a higher percentage completion of the entire COD campaign than Halo 3's third mission of 9. 55% of Halo 3 players never got a single achievement on 360. In the RPG space, the most chosen Fable 2 ending still only accounted for 27% of players. Mass Effect 2 was one of the biggest outliers I could find, with a whopping 55% of players on Xbox that finished the story, one of the highest percentages I was able to find, although that is only a couple million people. It's a game whose sales sadly never quite matched its legacy, and that sales thing is important. Stuff like Fallout and Elder Scrolls especially have lower achievement percentages thanks to Game Pass than they would have had back in the day, but even just looking at the original 360 version of Skyrim, nearly double the percentage of players finished that game's main questline compared to Oblivion, despite Skyrim selling far better than Oblivion could have ever dreamed of. Ezio's Assassin's Creed saga led to 40% of players finishing each game in that trilogy on Xbox compared to the first game's 28%. Now, the whole Game Pass wrinkle makes it a little bit easier to look at the PlayStation side of things for time capsule purposes, and since Microsoft doesn't give a lot of sales data anymore, it makes the math a bit mathier. 22% of Fallout 3 players on PS3 never left the vault, by the way. And actually, Sony's where I wanted to go next, since they've been so clearly designing and catering their experiences across the last generation or so in order to maximize player completion. I first noticed this with God of War Ragnarok. Disclosure before I forget, I've gotten press copies for much of the recent PS game lineup, so call me a shill now. When I was first playing Ragnarok for my review, I would cut the recording files right around when it felt like every level or section of the game was ending, and I noticed that with one major really long section in the middle, nearly every section was almost exactly 1 hour in length to fully explore, cutscenes and deaths and all, as if the game's very design was focused around whatever internal player data Santa Monica Studio had collected with the previous God of War game, that perhaps the average session time of the target audience or of the prior game's players was about an hour. And then I started to think a little further about how Sony's more recently published articles recommending games for busier players or parents using average play session lengths, how they've normalized a lot of the PlayStation-developed games' trophy lists to make the platinum look like less of a grind and more of a sampler. For example, going from get 10 headshots with the AK-47 in Uncharted on PS3 to just try every piece of side content once and you get the plat. Even going from 2017's Horizon Zero Dawn to its sequel 5 years later, or from infamous Second Son to Ghost of Tsushima, or just looking at the weird PS5 activity card system that tries to estimate how long the section of the game you're in will take, there's a consistent theme in these little things, trying to make it less intimidating or more respectful of a player's time. That way, fewer players fall off and effectively waste a lot of the developer's crunch, sweat, and tears. I reached out to a few of my contacts at some of the different PlayStation teams to ask about what kind of shifts they've made based on collected player data, or a broader internal directive perhaps. How many of these pacing tweaks were a deliberate design decision in something like God of War to cater this way, versus simply looking at game pacing in a vacuum, that kind of thing. At the time of recording, I've gotten a few no comments. In God of War's case, I got a more casual off-record, yeah, that was definitely the intent from somebody, and a few let me get back to yous elsewhere. If any of those reps do get back to me, I'll update the pinned comment below with those responses. And also, if you're an Xbox dev that has some insight into if or how Game Pass has affected your design philosophies, or player data or internal metrics of your games that you're allowed to share, by all means, reach out. I'd find you, but my Xbox contacts are sadly a bit more limited. Anyway, even without those extra details on the PlayStation side, this is all undoubtedly the result of a concerted effort to train casual players that if you like X, we also published Y and you should go buy and try that too. It's a shame that came at the cost of a lot of their quirkier games. How dare you not make an infinite number of Gravity Rush games, you monsters, but let's quickly run through how they got to this conclusion. Early first-party open-world titles like Infamous fell super hard into that old 20% beaten rule and had to slowly climb out of it. Uncharted had to build up that same rapport, jumping from 36% of 4 million buyers having beaten the first game to 42% in Uncharted 2, a game that sold nearly twice as well due to the whole being one of the most acclaimed games ever thing. Uncharted 3's pacing, meanwhile, started to drag a little bit, so that completion percentage fell down into the low 30s. But even still, this was one of the few PlayStation series that wasn't absolutely slumping sales-wise during the PS3. The Last of Us on PS3, as well as its PS4 port, were each also in the 40% range thanks to that whole most acclaimed game ever at the time word of mouth. A testament both to how many people resonated with that first game, and also that a majority of people do not and will never beat video games. And these are just some of the more broadly accessible games to the average player. If you look at the more niche stuff like any of the Ratchet & Clank games on PS3, the trophy percentages are pitiful, and a lot of the weirder, more out there games share a similar fate, low completion on far fewer sales. It was part of the identity crisis that Sony was going through in this era, since a lot of people jumped from PS2 to Xbox 360, and it would only get even harder to manage since up to a third of PS4 owners came from 360 or otherwise didn't have a PS3. That's even true from PS4 to 5 as well, according to Sony. It's pretty consistent that they're bringing on a new audience each generation, which is why they won't stop remaking all their goddamn games. Meanwhile, as PlayStation's identity crisis started to be solved, it indirectly led to the one Xbox has been struggling to figure out even today. Again, Game Pass lowers the achievement percentages drastically by giving every player a chance to try out every game, of course, but as Microsoft leaned so heavily into a multiplayer and third-party focus in the late 360 era onward, the percent of players even trying campaign content certainly has lagged behind the broader upswing across the industry. You've probably heard that anecdotally in day-to-day life over the years. People that used to play Halo or Gears multiplayer on their Xbox, or even just Call of Duty, but would turn on their PS4 for the story games. But here's the thing, if you isolate out the vast majority of Xbox players that don't ever get a single achievement in any given game thanks to Game Pass being such a great deal that we all have less incentive to stick to any one campaign for more than 10 minutes, I mean hey, I'm guilty of that, but even if you account for that, completion rates on Xbox published titles is still down. 51% of people that finished the first mission in Halo 3 finished the fight, at least on normal difficulty or higher. That dropped to 46% in 4, 38% in 5, and 35% in Infinite, which in that game's case is actually a good sign since that one's comparatively so new. That Halo 3 percentage is comparable to the number of people who got one trophy in Uncharted 1 that would later finish the campaign, but it only decreases as 343 further destroys my child. But this holds true for some of Xbox's games that have gone multi-platform as well. Of the folks that got the first story achievement in Psychonauts 2 on Xbox, 34% finished the campaign compared to 68% on PlayStation and 61% on Steam. What about Hellblade? 35% of Steam players and 46% of PlayStation players that got that first achievement or trophy, they finished the game compared to 19% on Xbox. Now that one's literally not even 10 minutes into the game though, that's kind of a Game Pass moment, so let's jump forward to Hellblade's second achievement, where 56% of Xbox players that got that far finished the game, compared to 72% on PlayStation and 64% on Steam. Even some third-party games have this disparity. Take Assassin's Creed Odyssey, a long-ass open-world game that usually doesn't translate to being beaten by most. 36% of PlayStation players and almost 38% of Steam players who got the first trophy in that game beat the story, compared to only 26% on Xbox, and that's a game that's actually free on both Game Pass and PS Plus's worst Game Pass. Mind you, don't make this a weird console war thing in the comments, it's just an interesting byproduct of the twins splitting off into two opposite directions last generation and the fallout that's come from that. Aside from Xbox Studios games though, once we break into that PS4 Xbox One era, the big AAA games regardless of publisher more broadly appear to hit that high 30 to low 40% finish range, picking up where the end of the PS360 era left off. Some modern games, like Death Stranding is a great example, they lose 70% of their players within a couple hours still, but PlayStation, in making all of its main titles more homogenous and annoying to some of us, it's been able to shift its games in particular into the high 40%, the low 50s, and even some games get to the highest percentages I could find full stop on ever-increasing sales volume. Spider-Man 2, for example, is at 56% beaten right now. The last sales update was that it hit just over 6 million copies in its first 3 weeks. With the entire holiday season left unaccounted for, it's not unlikely that more people finished Spider-Man 2 in the year 2023 than bought Uncharted 1 on PlayStation 3. The only game I could find full stop that had a higher percentage of games beaten than Spider-Man 2 was The Last of Us 2 at 58%. Controversial as that game is online, 3 out of every 5 accounts that started that game up once played the whole 25+ hour, really slow-ass story, no matter how dark it got or how upset they got at it. Talk about a reminder that most online gaming discourse like this is always going to be a bit skewed. The general player is talking about games with their friends, or just not at all, certainly not on YouTube or Twitter. But back to the most beaten games ever list. Thanks to over 22 million sales on the PS4 version of Spider-Man 1 as of early 2022, along with another 1.5 million PC sales as of early 2023, and however many of the PS5 remasters players were new versus folks who just imported their saves from the PS4, Spidey's on that list. On Steam and PS4, Spidey's got a pretty consistent 49% finish rate, so that's at least 11.6 million people, and I'm just going to completely avoid trying to estimate how many of Spidey PS5's players were new or how many sales have come through on any of these versions in the last 1 to 2 years. I did reach out to Insomniac as well to see if they would share any data that they'd gathered from the PS5 version specifically. If they get back to me after I publish, I'll update the pinned comment. But in short, if Spidey 1 has hit 25 million unique sales, or even players, and we don't even want to start thinking about borrowed copies or anything, it would be above that non-China Minecraft completion total. Well, I lied, I'll touch on used games once. Uncharted 4 is only at a paltry 37% beaten rate, but Naughty Dog revealed in 2021 that 37 million unique people had played the game, so that's around 14 million people that have rolled credits as of 3 years ago, when the game's sales around then were between 16 and 20 million, and the movie and PS5 remaster and the PC port had not come out yet. Again, borrowed games, used game sales, and freebies like PS Plus and Game Pass make everything foggier. I'm just gonna pretend that every game's true player count 5 years after release is uniformly close to double its true sales until I can hopefully get better answers. I know I'm never gonna get better answers, but let me have this. Even putting aside the game beaten percentages seeming to track up generation to generation from the 360 era to today, it's the raw sales on top of those percentages that really hammers home for every system that we're seeing more games be beaten than ever before, even if in most cases it's still not most people getting to the credits. Again, remember that all 3 current systems are the fastest selling of their respective companies' history. I haven't had a chance to talk much about Nintendo due to the achievement focus of this video and the fact that they don't have those, but a greater percentage of Switch owners have Breath of the Wild than N64 owners have Ocarina. Actually, more people have Breath of the Wild than N64s that exist at this point. It's insane how Nintendo's gotten every single game series to have its best performance on this system, and I would be shocked if any internal completion data they have didn't align with these trends outlined today. At some point, I want to put together a more complete picture of how all 3 have adapted to get players to consume more of their games, whether it's more as a percentage of each game with Sony, more as a percentage of all of their games like with Xbox, or via a combination of both of those with Nintendo, along with some old-fashioned platform consolidation. But that goes way beyond the scope of today's video, and we've answered every big question I set out to with this one. If you do start browsing through your old achievement or trophy data, let me know what cool examples you find in the comments below. And if you want another dumb video like this to answer a question you've probably never asked, have you ever wondered how games with multiple discs work? I gotcha, go do the thing and subscribe while you're over there. As always, until next time, stay golden.